All right, so let's talk solutions to externalities. We understand the problem, let's fix the problem. Solution number one for us is going to be a very powerful economic and legal result called the Coase theorem. The Coase theorem states that given an externality, if negotiation is free, aka if negotiation is no cost, then both sides will bargain to the efficient low cost outcome. That's to say, suppose there is a good that creates an externality. If the market participants in the market for that good, the producers and consumers, can negotiate at no cost with the people external to that market who are affected by the good in that market's externality, then the negotiation between the people externally affected and the market participants will generate the efficient outcome, the socially optimal outcome. Here, efficient, low cost, and socially optimal are all synonyms. All right, interesting. That seems pretty cool. It kind of makes it sound like externalities aren't a real problem. Let's take a look at an example to think about, to sort of see the Coase theorem in action. Suppose truck drivers generate pollution as they drive. Their trucks spit out exhaust, and that exhaust makes farmers' cows sick. For the purpose of this example and simplicity, suppose that that's the only cost, the only externality generated by these truck drivers. There's no, the truck exhaust doesn't contribute to climate change, doesn't contribute to an air quality decline. It just makes these farmers' cows sick. For the sake of thinking through this example, let's throw a couple more details in here. First, suppose that the cost of the sickness for farmers is $100. Their cows get sick, they have to spend $100 to either fix the sickness or get a new cow. The second additional detail is that the cost of a filter to eliminate truck exhaust is only $50. So the cost of the sickness generated by the trucks is $100. The cost of fixing the exhaust is only $50. And truck drivers earn $51 for every trip that they take. All right. Let's talk through two scenarios and the two potential outcomes that those scenarios generate in the world of this example. In scenario one, suppose that truck drivers have the right to drive by the farms. It is their right to get in their truck, putz along, and spit out exhaust that then makes these farmers' cows sick. If that's the case, and if the truck drivers and the farmers can negotiate for free, then the farmers will just buy the $50 filter for the drivers in order to prevent the $100 sickness. When they come to the negotiation table, metaphorically speaking, the farmers will know that the cost of the exhaust on them is $100 worth of sickness for their livestock, and they'll learn that it would only cost them $50 to prevent that illness. So they'll easily decide, hey, I'm going to incur this $50 cost of the filter in order to prevent this $100 cost of the sickness. That's great. That's the efficient outcome. Truck drivers continue to earn money for every trip, and the farmers prevent the sickness. They get the low cost outcome. In scenario two, suppose farmers have the right to decide who drives by their farms. So if they don't want the truck drivers to drive past and make their cows sick, they can say, sorry, truck drivers, you can't make the trip. In that scenario, if negotiation is free, then drivers will buy the $50 filter for themselves so that they can earn the $51 per trip. They realize that they can't drive if the farmers tell them not to, and they see that the benefits of driving outweigh the costs of fixing their exhaust, so they choose to fix their exhausts and they still get to earn money. In both scenarios, the truck drivers keep driving and we get the efficient, low-cost outcome. We get the outcome where there is no sickness and the truck drivers get to keep making $51 per trip. In both scenarios, we spend $51, we prevent $100 worth of additional damage, and we make $51 for every trip. The efficient outcome. Beautiful. Who pays for the filter? Just depends on who has control over the roads. It depends on the property rights. That's great. We love it. We fixed cow illness. Congratulations. Unfortunately, Coase isn't always that perfect. There are some problems with the Coase theorem, and we can't necessarily rely on Coase to be a perfect solution to markets with externalities, that particular flavor of market failure. In particular, as you might imagine, negotiation is usually not free. It's usually quite complicated and quite large scale. So in the context of the example, there are a lot of truck drivers in the world, and or I should say there are a lot of truck drivers in the United States, and there are a whole lot of cattle ranches located next to highways in the United States. That means negotiation is going to require this large-scale coordination between truck drivers and between farmers, all of whom are geographically disparate and otherwise or largely unaffiliated with each other. That's a huge logistical task that's actually going to cost quite a bit of money. Also, negotiation usually involves attorneys. Attorneys tend to charge a whole lot of money. And so, again, negotiation is usually not free. That's to say, a lot of times the conditions aren't necessarily met for market participants and the people externally affected by the market to negotiate for free. If negotiation is free, if we have created that context somehow, the second problem that we have to overcome with Coase is that the Coase theorem depends on well-defined property rights. Think back to our example. There were two different scenarios and two different definitions of property rights. In the first scenario, the drivers had the right to drive their trucks, and in the second scenario, the farmers had the right to decide who drove past their farms. If we want to facilitate bargaining between the two parties, the externally affected people, the people affected by the externality, and the people generating the externality, then we have to clearly define the property rights so that they can negotiate over from well-defined positions of ownership. The third and final problem is that it can call fairness into question. So let's say we've created a context in which negotiation is relatively low cost, relatively free. We've created a context in which property rights are well defined. Lastly, we have to make sure that those property rights are defined in a way that doesn't necessarily threaten or that agrees with our sense of equity. In one scenario of our example, farmers bore 100% of the cost of the externality. They weren't the ones driving the truck, but they still had to pay for the externality that the truck drivers created. In the second scenario, the drivers had to pay for 100% of the cost of the externality. They weren't the ones raising cows next to the road, but they still had to pay to fix those cows' illness by putting filters on their trucks. It's not clear which of those is the most equitable outcome. So a lot of times, the government's role in a market with an externality is to first define property rights so that the two sides can negotiate, and then also to define those property rights in a way that leads to a relatively equitable solution. Although there are these problems with Coase, that isn't to say that it is an unhelpful solution. In fact, Coase theorem is a really powerful and helpful result. It means that the government doesn't have to be the one to reshape these markets necessarily. It can be, but the government can also help generate socially optimal, efficient outcomes if it just defines property rights in a clear way and then lets all of the people affected by the market negotiate over over the externality in the framework created by those property rights. All right, that's solution number one. Solution number two, uh, we'll get to in the next video, and we're going to call on our knowledge of taxes and learn about subsidies. Okay, great job, y'all. I will see you in the next video.